This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. The subject is the decline of the media or not. I have two experts who will be talking about it, and the conversation will begin when we return. The subject is the decline of the media. Is it a myth or is it true? And I have two journalists who will be speaking about it. I have Richard Prince and I have David Levine. And welcome, gentlemen. I will start with David first. David, give you a little background about who you are, what you do, and any opening volleys you have on the subject.
Thank you, Dan. I don't pretend to be a journalist. I'm more of a marketing expert, having been in advertising and on the marketing side for many years, and have taught it on the college level at Rutgers University for about 20 years. My observations about the decline of media is that it's real, and would like to respond to any questions that you might have on it. But the expertise is there, and the point of view is there that there has been a terrible, terrible decline in the quality of media.
Richard Prince is my other guest. Richard, if you give a little background about yourself as well as any opening thoughts you have on the subject.
Okay, my name is Richard Prince, and I write a column called Journalisms, Journal-Isms, at journal-isms.com, and it's about diversity issues in the news business. And I've been doing this for about 20 years, and have worked in newsrooms. So I consider myself steeped in journalism because that consumes my my existence at the moment. My initial thoughts about whether the media have declined, I think it's a different media than it was before, but that's not necessarily a decline. It's more of a proliferation of different kinds of media.
So let's talk about the so-called golden age. One of the fellows I tried to get that you may have seen some of the emails of was of the belief that the golden age is sort of a myth, that, you know, we started out with journalism and the print media back in the 19th century, and you had, you know, the yellow journalism, muckrakers, you had Thomas Nast doing the cartoons that would, you know, rip into people, and some people will make that argument that there never was any kind of golden age. Others will look back at sort of the mid-20th century with the height of the New York Times after World War II, the rise of radio and television. You know, Edward R. Murrow is held up as Saint Walter Cronkite as well sometimes. So let me start with you, Richard. Do you think there ever was a golden age of reportage journalism?
We may be living in it now. And I say that because in all those previous golden ages that you mentioned, the media was segregated.
Richard, can you just move a little bit more central? When
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
When you move away, you fade.
All right. Yeah. Well, as I was saying, in those previous golden ages that you cited, the media was segregated, and that had a profound effect on the country's perception of itself, and ultimately led to, and by 1967, after the urban riots of the 1960s, the Kerner Commission report saying the media was partly to blame for what was taking place because they had failed to properly report on what was happening in Black communities around the country. So since then, we have had a movement among in the media and in the country in general to more fairly reflect the population. So where we did not have women news anchors before, we do now. We didn't have Latinos. We didn't have Asian American. We still don't have hardly any Native Americans. We have transgender and LGBT people on the air now. None of that was present before. And what the Kerner Commission said in 1968 was that the media were presenting a white male view of the world. That was dangerous.
So let me ask you, David, what is your take on what I just said about golden age?
Richard, I appreciate what Richard said, and he's correct on the presentation. I would beg to differ on the content. Yes, the machine behind it was the white male machine behind it, and that had to change. But the objectivity, the truth in the media presentation was there without there's a very strict wall coming from an advertising point of view and a marketing point of view. There's a very strict wall between the editorial side and the publishing side of all those publications and news oriented. You could not influence that. The news was independent, editorial and advertising was different. What's happened today that I feel is, yes, the proliferation of all these different mediums and media that's out there has created a lack of standard wherein the information, the content, yes, the presenters have become more representative, and that's a wonderful growth aspect, and it's always welcome to be that way. But the content is what has changed. The advertorial words, the adverbs that are added to the news stories that slant the news, not the editorial pages, but the news side, has been absolutely terrible. And the New York Times has been cited over and over and over again as one of the worst perpetrators of this offense.
Richard, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any difference. You can't put a line between presenters and what's being presented. The people behind the scenes are the ones who determine what gets on the air and in the newspaper. And if they are not representative of the public, what you see is not going to be representative of the public. You just mentioned the New York Times. One of the things they did last year was the 1619 Project. Another thing was reporting on the racism of Tucker Carlson. That was just a couple of months ago. Those kinds of things would not have been done in previous eras. You have an African American editor of the New York Times who just stepped down, Dean Baquet. If you're presenting news that's if you're presenting news that is not quote unquote objective, first of all, the word objective is problematic. It means both sides basically, and both sides of them give equal weight to things that don't deserve equal weight. We just went through this whole era of.
Can you just move over a little bit, Richard? I'm losing you again.
But we just went through the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, and where there was a lot of soul searching among the media about whether they were giving too much weight to the police version of accounts, because police said had become standard, and there was that that was the term objective, giving the point of view of the establishment and giving short shrift to everybody else. And with people who come from the places that have been previously marginalized, presenting and deciding what actually is news and how it should be presented, there has been a democratization of the product. So I think you can't separate the people who are presenting from the people who are making the decision behind the scenes.
Well, let me ask this, Richard. Let's take the war in Ukraine now. One of the things that was at the beginning of that war that was brought up was how a lot of white journalists were going, "Oh my, this was a civilized country that was being invaded." Well, they didn't say that about in the Middle East or wars in Africa or Asia. And there was obviously when they meant civilized, they really meant white.
Right.
But if what I'm trying to get at is, well, that's good. If you look at and I'll talk about it in a moment. If you look at, I think, the way 60, 50 years ago, the Vietnam War was reported, they might say, LBJ says blah, blah about the war. There wasn't as David was saying, there wasn't the adverbial or the adjectival usage of things. For example, if you look at like terror attacks, they'll be talking about terror in the post-Roe world that we're living now, just a few weeks since Roe versus Wade was overturned. You get a lot more of the tabloidiness. I grew up in New York, the Daily News, it was either the Daily News, the Post, or the New York Times. The Times has gotten more Daily News or New York Post-like, it seems, in the way that it screams with its headlines. Do you concede that at least?
I don't see it, but everybody sees things, from his or her own perspective. I will say this, what you brought up about Ukraine is interesting because we have a monthly Zoom session known as the Journalism Roundtable. And when Ukraine first, when the invasion first took place, we had first Malcolm Nance, who was an African American, who is a former counterintelligence agent. You may have seen him on MSNBC. But we also had a young man named Terrell Jermaine Starr, who was also African American, but who has been in Ukraine for years, Ukraine and Russia. And he certainly saw the racial dynamics operating in Ukraine in a different way from others. For example, he talked about how the Russians themselves have racist tendencies that were played out in Ukraine. For example, the way they treat Arabs and people in Muslim areas in Russia. He saw a direct parallel between the way the Russians were treating those folks and the way they treated Ukrainians. We had a gentleman from who was covering China for the Associated Press, who was a Korean American. And he said when he was in China, he still actually is in China, but one of the things that he noted coming into there as a person who was not from that particular culture is how China was treating the people who are not favored in China. And he saw parallels between, segregation and all the other racism in other places around the world. And that's not something you get when everybody who's making the decisions behind the scenes is from the same background.
David, what is your comment?
The lens that Richard is using is a very interesting one of being just focused on the racist aspect or the racist tendencies of the people or the race of the individual that's there. And I'm still focused on the content, regardless of who the presenter.
But that affects the content. Sorry, but that does affect the content.
Time out. Hear me out. Because
Yeah.
you mentioned Ukraine.
Yes.
And Ukraine is a very unique situation, not so unique situation where we're all wishful thinkers and hopeful for the Ukrainian people that are being beaten up by these Russians. Yet the Ukrainians have a terrible history of racism, anti-Semitism, and pure out murder during World War II. So we all have certain baggage that we come with. What I'm talking about is that, and I see this mostly in two areas, and I understand your lens, Richard, I really, really do. I see it in two things, and I see it from my perspective in both politics and in the Middle East, especially Israel, because that's my viewpoint. Just like you have yours and I have mine. That everything that's been reported in the New York Times when I was growing up, it was my paper of record. The news was clearly laid out. And when I talk about objectivity, I disagree with your statement that it's two sides. Objectivity is taking the facts and interpreting them to either your way or the other way, not that they're both equal. The facts are the facts. I think Moynihan once said you can have one set of facts and two sets of opinions, but we have to have that one truth. We have to have that one fact, that we have to go off of. And what I find happening today, both in politics, mostly in politics, and in Israel-Palestinian or Israel-world relationships, is that it's not there. The reporters, regardless of their ethnicity, speak and ask questions, and the people that speak to them, they just take it and write it down and pass it on and don't ask them to, well, what do you mean by that? Or verify that. They allow the lies that are being stated on both political and Middle Eastern stuff. For example, they'll make claims that Israel is illegally occupying something or other. But nobody will ask, would you quote me which law you claim they're illegally occupying? They'll say that the criminal activity of this particular politician, but they won't state the statute that the politician is supposedly violating. They make the statements in that adverb that qualifies their and colors the reporting that we all take away. You and I know, Richard, words matter, and the words we use are crafted in such a way that they connote images in our minds. And if they're repeated over and over again in the news pages, not in the editorial pages, but in the news pages, they affect our thinking. And that's my beef with media. Now, with the advent of the internet, anybody with an internet connection can be a reporter on any particular website that purports itself to report the news, as opposed to what Dan was talking about, the golden age of Dan Aykroyd, Dan Rather. I'm sorry, Saturday Night Live. We're gonna Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite and all those, where they went out of their way, and the headlines that you sent, Dan, you sent a beautiful little video that I watched that talked about the types of headlines that appeared in potentially inflammatory things that were blanded down and made to be just the facts, man. Going back to Jack Webb and Dragnet, just the facts. And I don't find that anymore when I'm reading, and I'm reading the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, NBC, CNBC, Sky News. I'm going all over the place. And I don't care which channel you're watching. Everybody's got this editorializing rather than give me the news. As we were children, and you watch that 6 o'clock news at 6:27, then the word commentary would come up at the bottom, and the reporter or the anchor would read the commentary. Otherwise, it was just the news.
Well, let me ask, Richard, have you ever lived in the New York area?
Yes, I'm from New York.
Okay, so
Hey, we're all from New York. We're all from New York.
I was born in '65, and I remember when I was 5 or 6 years old. Do you remember on Channel 5 there was Black News with Bill McCreary?
Well, I was, I know of it, but I don't think I was watching it.
I remember all the local news. You're right, Dan. All the local news had an interesting representation. I'm from New York, I was born in '53, and I'm in New York, Long Island, New York City, all my life.
Yeah.
And I watched all the 9, 7, 9, and 11, and those, and then the local news would come up before after the national news.
Bill McCreary was probably the first black anchorman in the New York area, and he would on Sunday nights he'd have Black News, which would focus on at the time the riots in what what was the ones in Jersey, Newark. And
Everything
it would be, but he always had that police assaulted 3 black teenagers today in the Bensonhurst area of Brooklyn or whatnot, and even there he would have that. And I'm not saying you have to be monotone, but you would have that like he said, the just the facts. I did send that video, and that was the genesis of me wanting to do the show, although I've had this idea before. In the 1960s, the example that's used in the Richard Times, it says, what's his name? It was Khrushchev. Khrushchev outlines economic plan, or something like that. I mean, a very simple title.
It was Khrushchev said charts.
New economic course or something, yeah. And then if you look in the 2020s, the same headlines. Well, first off, there's a big photo of Tucker Carlson on the page of one of them, as if anything he would say.
And that's just feeding the frenzy. He doesn't deserve all that.
Yeah.
Print.
Now, so when you see something like that, though, when Tucker Carlson is on the front page of the New York Times, isn't that really going to the lowest common denominator? Because what they're going for is to stir the pot, to get right wingers and left wingers to send in editorial letters and blow their noses one way or the other. Richard?
That's me?
Yeah.
I can't agree with that.
No?
I think Tucker Carlson and everything he represents is a big, big story that you can trace right up to January 6th and the attempt to overthrow our democracy. If you don't think that's a story, I think we have just different terminology. I also think that it's unfair to paint all reporters and all journalists with the same brush, in that reporters don't check their facts or ask the right follow-up questions. I think that different reporters do their jobs in different ways. And as I said before, we have such a plethora of media organizations now, and that's part of the problem. You can find the media organization that will suit your view of the world and shut out everybody else, which is what's happening with the people who follow Trump and Donald and Tucker Carlson and Fox News. The whole business about just the facts. Which facts? I mean, this is a nuanced profession here. There are facts and there are facts, and they're not all equal. and which ones you think are important is up to up to your professional judgment. And
Well,
each one has each person brings to the table and to the profession his or her own idea of what is important.
well, you just reiterated exactly basically what David said in just slightly different words about Moynihan actually said, I believe it was, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. And
Right.
so
But which facts do you use? That's
right,
the thing.
right, and I agree. Tucker Carlson and his lot should be lambasted, but I'm someone who's don't vote Republican or Democrat. I don't like Pelosi and the green dream. These young kids with their green dream making fun of global warming like that too. I think they're bad, but it's how you approach it. Because if you're going to, let's say, if you're going to attack someone, put aside the journalism. If you're going after their opinion rather than them, they can't say, "Well, he's picking on me. That he's using ad hominem." If you, I think the thing that you find often is the left side often mimics the right. They want to be the left version of Fox News, and we don't need another Fox News. We don't need one Fox News. We don't need two or 10 with each with their own little positions. So go ahead, Richard or David, if whichever one
Well, I
wants
was
to
just
jump
gonna say, I don't think that really has to do with journalism. I mean,
in. Yeah.
that's people's opinions, and they're doing that. But in the case of Tucker Carlson, it's not that the Times is lambasting Tucker Carlson because it was in the news section. They are telling you what is going on. In fact, I just happened to be corresponding this very morning with the author of that three-part series that was in the New York Times. And let me see if I can call it up here because he addressed this whole issue about what he thinks they accomplished and their approach to the series. Let me see now. You can. It might take me minutes to find this. So if you
Okay.
want to, oh no, here it is. Here it is. Here it is. He said, ba, 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 ba. For my Tucker story, I wasn't really doing media criticism. I'd asked him because I'd written about Tucker myself, what can be done. So I didn't talk to a lot of ethicist types. I would say that what distinguished our story was two major elements. One was our extensive reporting from inside Fox, showing beyond any doubt that Carlson and his bosses were aware that he was importing racist material from the far right, and in fact chose to do more and more of it because it boosted ratings and had become part of their business model. The other was our database, constructed by my colleague Karen Urish, which documented the frequency and range of his use of ideas formerly caged on the far right, taking readers out of the realm of anecdote and into the world of hard facts. Now, this illustrates what I'm saying about, there are facts and there are facts. The New York Times in that series chose to get to the bottom of what's behind this and to find the facts necessary to bring forth to the public. It's not just expressing an opinion.
But what happens is that it gets dangerous when it affects world politics if we take it up a level. And I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. Please understand that what you said is from the horse's mouth. It has merit and it has value because that's the intent of the person that's writing that. However, when I hear Trump say the China virus a couple of years ago, and everybody gets all excited about that and calls him all kinds of names, and then the New York Times comes out with an article, an expose written by 5 or 6 reporters. So it took months and months to write and research, and publishes that article after the election rather than before. And that article points to the fact that it was a China virus, it was from the labs, it was funded by Fauci, all the stuff that everybody on the, if you want to call it the right, was saying. And the timing of the article is to put forth there's got to be something behind that kind of thing. That's one point. The other point is that it's not only the content of what the person's writing, the technology that we're living with today is that there are algorithms behind it that are controlling the reader's mind without realizing it. There's a guy named Eli Pariser, Pariser, gave a TED talk on something called, and wrote a book on the filter bubble, whether it has to do with your Facebook page, your news feeds, or whatever it is, if you start clicking on stories that are of interest to you, whatever your political or social or interest bent is, all of a sudden the system knows that that's what you want to see and slowly builds a bubble around you without even you realizing it, that puts forth in front of your news feeds those kind of stories. And what I miss about the New York Times front page is the eclecticness of the articles, because I didn't know what I was interested in. I relied on that editor to give me a broad spectrum of international, national, local, human interest stories, as opposed to Tucker Carlson taking up 2/3 of the front page when I want to read everything else. And oh yeah, that's of interest too. But the size of it just blows me away. And we're talking a lot of electronic stuff. It's just, I want to focus on the news of the world as well as what happens to me locally. And I guess I have an issue with this that I see very closely, all this partisan stuff that takes place in everything, whether it was Dan's talking about the Green Deals, or whether we're talking about Israel, or we're talking about racism, or we're talking about, the summer of love that happened in 2021 versus, there's no riots behind us, versus January 6th, which was a terrible thing. It's mind-boggling what's going on out there, and it's just gotten so bad that I can't tell the news from the news shows that are having, people sit around and talk about it. It's not a news show of an anchor giving the news. As I said, I watch a lot of different things, and there's something on Fox News called The Five, at 5. And there's 5 people sitting around, and one is more Democratic than the others are. And I was wondering one day why I liked that show so much. And the answer was, oh, it's 5 people sitting around complaining. I liked it because it was people complaining about everything that was going on in the world. And they're right. They may not be right about their opinions and so forth and so on, and they go off on it. And I yell at them just as much as I yell at anybody else. It's my new sport. Instead of rooting for teams and yelling at the umpire, I yell at news shows, and whether it be left or right or MSNBC or CNN, whatever, they make these comments that are not the news. I'm sorry, Richard, not the news. And I'm looking for the facts so that I can make up my mind. I don't want my news colored in that respect. And the unfortunate part is the traditional news show of the anchor going out to reporters in the field has changed to these tables, people talking and offering opinions. And when a talking head comes on and I search up what credibility does that person have, oh, she went to journalism school. That's not it. But the guy that sat on the CIA desk in Moscow for 10 years, he's got some credibility, and I'm going to listen to them. I want those people telling me what's going on in the world.
Well, is the difference really soft news versus hard news? Because one of the things that video I sent in made that in the 70s, advertising, network news, for example, and also other media, but mostly network news, wanted to make money. And to make money, you can't just report about, well, there was a tornado or 3 tornadoes in Kansas that wiped out, an elementary school. This is not. So you have to get things, exposés. The rise of 60 Minutes. People would always say, well, it's great reporting 60 Minutes, but by the same token, they often went out of their way for the most sensational stuff. Did something like 60 Minutes lead to a slippery slope, do you think, David?
I don't think so. I think the integrity that they had in most of the news stories that 60 Minutes had, it was a news magazine. It's the magazine section of the newspaper. And in a wide variety and a wide scope of things that are interesting. I think, Richard, you'll remember that the news media, the news mantra that basically dog bites man doesn't make news, but man bites dog makes news. Of course, we're looking for that sensationalism to sell the newspaper. It is a business after all.
Richard, what is your take on that?
Well, I don't think Fox and Friends and those kind of shows should be considered news shows.
I agree with you. They're not.
They should not be put in the same category. If we're talking about the news, the presentation of the news, we shouldn't be talking about Fox and Friends. That's one thing. Second thing is about the China virus, quote unquote, and whether there was some attempt to hush over that and use another term. Yes, there was an attempt to use another term. How many other diseases have the name of a country attached to them?
The Spanish flu didn't start in Spain.
Wait, let me finish. How many other diseases have prompted attacks on an entire ethnic group because they they share the same ethnicity as people thousands of miles away. And that's what happened to Asian Americans in this country, the United States, when this anti-Chinese, I don't want to say hysteria, but this anti-Chinese uh, discussion propped up, banned by the people like Donald Trump, who called this the China virus. I even remember when he spoke to the Chinese American reporter at one of his news conferences after this whole China virus thing. And she had to remind him that she was born in West Virginia. She's not from China. So you tell me how that's a good thing.
David, do you have a response? And then we'll take a break here.
My response is measured in the sense that there are stupid people out there, and there are people. There are people.
There are consequences for that.
I know, and that's where education comes in, and that's where diversity comes in. That's why I have a big problem with it, because I don't see it coming from New York. Growing up on the streets of New York, growing up in the workplace in New York, I grew up in a diverse environment. I don't understand it when I look at people making those kind of comments and associating with an individual that has nothing to do with it. I don't understand it from a personal point of view. So I can only speak from that point of view. It's the product of my environment. But words, again, and I apologize if that's what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say was the timing of the article, whether it be Hunter Biden, or whether it be the Chinese virus, let's call it the Chinese government influence of that virus rather than the individual. The problem is the media has become complicit in some of the timings of things. And you're right, Fox and Friends is not a news show, but maybe the one with Bill Hemmer or what, I don't even know half the names of these people, is a news show because they present themselves as an anchor giving out stories. The others are talk shows, and there's too many of them. I want to see news. One thing I liked about New York City was, when's New York? Give me 20 minutes and I'll give you the world. That kind of concept where I can turn in any time and get the news, and really get the news of what's happening, international, local, sports, weather, human interest. That's what we're looking for, and we make our own decisions after that.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry?
Come on.
I just want to say about the multiplicity of outlets. If you want all news, you can just turn it on and get all news.
I want to talk about a couple of points, and a couple of points that was in that source video that came to me. But one of the points that was made in that video, and let me start with you, Richard, was the dropping of the fairness doctrine. Can you tell us what the fairness doctrine was, and its impact after it went away in the Reagan years?
Right. Well, the fairness doctrine was promulgated by the Federal Communications Commission, and it required that contrasting opinions be aired if you're going to air opinions. And so that was applied to politicians, and there was, it gets back to this whole business about both sidesism, because there were people who complained that all sides do not necessarily need to be heard, and so there was an uproar. It was there was a backlash against a lot of federal regulation anyway under the Reagan administration, and so that died. But what also died with it were a lot of affirmative action programs in broadcasting to make sure that more voices were heard because of the diversity of ownership. So anyway, that was a part of this whole, this is the Reagan-esque doctrine that was prominent in the 80s.
And do you think that was a good thing, the fairness doctrine, and was it a good thing or a bad thing to do away with it?
I don't know. I think that I think people said it was not even I think even its supporters said it was not an entirely successful thing, but that's all relative. I'd have to do some more research to find out whether how much of the current situation that we're complaining about now can be traced to the abolition of the fairness doctrine and how much cannot. But we live in different times now, and we did then as well. We we do exercise some of our own fairness doctrine in the selections we make for who was on the air, who's not. Pat Buchanan is no longer there. Bill Riley is no longer there. Um, Tucker Carlson is still there. But you get what I'm saying, that a lot of these choices are made not today, not because of fairness and a desire for fairness, but because what helps the bottom line the most. And I think that's what the federal communication was getting at. Let's not let our desire for dollars uh, overwhelm the obligation that comes with using the public airwaves.
Well, now with someone like Tucker Carlson, he's sort of the antithesis of someone like Whoopi Goldberg. Both of them are really just celebrities who mix it up in politics, because you'll only see their latest, whatever they said that got them in trouble, on Twitter and all this stuff. But the fairness doctrine, when I was a kid, I remember, 60 Minutes, there'd be the two talking heads, my
yes.
point, your point, back and forth, and they'd go for 2 or 3 minutes, with succinct little 20, 30-second snippets in rebuttal or whatnot. If that was still around, basically a Tucker Carlson would have to have a liberal on the other side and, pick whatever, mainstream journalist that people would say is left biased, would have to have a more conservative on the other side. David, what is your take on the fairness doctrine?
Well, I don't know if I agree with you, Dan, because that the counterpoint, or the fairness doctrine, as I recall it as a child, was to allow, when there's elections and stuff like that, people that couldn't afford, or PSAs that had to run, that there'd be some representation there. What you're talking about is, as Richard talks about, the bottom line of the TV show, and it's their space to do with what they want to do. Paid advertising versus public relations, controlled versus uncontrolled space. I think that we are a democracy that has a capitalistic bent to it, and the bottom line does tell you why people like Glenn Beck are not on TV anymore, or other people like Whoopi Goldberg might be on the edge because she's just making too much trouble, and I don't like that, or the executives may not like it because it's bad PR. So there's a challenge there. As the fairness doctrine comes around, I again saw it more to allow PSAs on TV, public service announcements, as well as some balance in the editorial aspect of it, because you want a balanced point of view. You want 2 points of view, given in sorry, Richard, non-emotional but factual based points of view, as opposed to, and facts to me are, by definition, something I can go to an original source like a document and say, oh yeah, that's what it says there, and that's why I'm saying this, as opposed to a spin that may not be totally there. So you're right. I think the fairness doctrine, I have a problem with government regulations completely, because, for example, today government regulations are not keeping up with technology as it relates to privacy, which is a whole nother discussion on children's privacy, people's privacy. It's our data, or is it their data? And I have many examples in my class that I use where there are toys that are sitting on the shelf that are recording what children are saying in their rooms. And the legislation is just not keeping up with. So I agree with Richard that not everybody's happy with the way legislation works. They're just not with it. They're not connected to what's happening in reality.
Let me ask both of you. One of the points that was made in that source video that I mentioned was that after the Red Scare of McCarthy in the 50s, a lot of journalism schools basically stood back and said, well, is it really journalism to, when you have someone as obviously noxious and dangerous as McCarthy potentially was, or you could say same thing about some people in our day, to, if people are actively lying, the big lie of Trump supposedly about the stolen election, is it being complicit to give, more air to that when it's false? Richard.
Well, I think that the mainstream media, at least, are handling this responsibly by every time they mention the quote unquote big lie, they always include the term false there. as he falsely stated, or and giving the fact that all these courts have thrown out this argument, etc. So I think that uh, I think people are going to believe what they want to believe, and that's really at the the nub of it. Fox News and its viewers choose, not to air and to watch the January 6th hearings because it will upset their worldview and what they're being told. I think one of the most poignant uh, um, bits of testimony at that January 6th hearing was the factory worker from Ohio, I believe, who said he believed everything that Trump had said, and that he only followed on social media people he agreed with, uh, uh, or who agreed with him, I should say, about this whole business about a stolen election. And that when he found out that he'd been lied to all that time, uh, he was, he was, I don't know what to say. He was upset, but it was his own fault because he chose only to listen to the media that he agreed with, and not to, to try to have a broad media diet. I mean, garbage in, garbage out, and that's what happens, and it's dangerous for our democracy. Now, I don't think that these shows like 60 Minutes, which had the pro and the con, with James J. Kilpatrick and Nick Verhoeven and others, were doing that just to be good citizens. I think it makes for good television. That's why on Fox and Friends and Fox News Sunday, they always have a quote unquote liberal, and on Fox News Sundays, it's Juan Williams, because it makes for good television to have clashes of philosophy. If everybody was saying the same things, it would be dull.
Well, let me just ask you though. You talk about Juan Williams. Isn't that just playing right into the binary of good, bad, right, left? I mean, because we don't see Green Party people, we don't see socialists, we don't see other third parties, people representing those points of views, and isn't what is your take on that, Richard?
Well, if they thought that those points of view would sell, and that their viewers would welcome them and boost their ratings, they would do that.
Okay, Richard, what is your take?
Well, Dan, if I may, I'd like to go back to your first statement about the concept of the big lie.
Yeah.
And I understand zeroing in on what you were talking about, Richard, but if we go back to this, do you know where the phrase "the big lie" comes from? What is it based on?
Hitler.
Correct. Actually, it's Goebbels, but it was Hitler who basically said, "If the more outlandish statement I make, and the more often I repeat that statement, the more it will be believed."
Yeah.
And that's why what you said, Richard, the diet of your news and to question everything and peel back the onion is so important. There's an assignment I give my students in marketing communications. I tell them, go to an event. I don't care about the event or what it's for. Go to an event. And then the next day, read some of the news feeds that are for it and some of the news feeds that are against it. The news feeds that are for it will say it was well attended. The news feeds against it will say nobody showed up. And you will know that they are both wrong because you were there. Only you. You got to peel back the onion. You got to just not take what's said at you. You got to go, is that true? Can you prove that? Can I look it up someplace? Can I search an original source? And unfortunately, that's why I wrote an article. I'm sorry, Richard, but I wrote this article in August of 2021, and it says journalism is dead. You're on your own, because because of what we're just talking about. That these Fox and Friends or these guys on CNBC or NBC or CNN or the New York Times versus the Wall Street Journal, they all have this agenda, and they're all saying what we may think are truths mixed up here, but only you can peel that back and see what are they disguising those truths in, and what really is that I should think about, like that poor guy from Ohio that said I was lied to. Well, yeah, if you just question, does that make sense? There's a website Snopes and these other things that I can quickly find out if something's real or not. If it's too good to be true, it's not true. It's just common sense.
But
It's
Dave,
just common sense.
David, does that not abnegate the responsibility of journalism? I mean, does journalism have a responsibility to at least, even if they're wrong, to be
100%. In fact, there is an organization that has not responded to anything I've tweeted. It's called the Society of Professional Journalists. And they have a mantra: seek the truth, report it, minimize harm, act independently, be accountable, and transparent. And I don't see that. And I'm sorry, this is where we go back to the topic of the decline of media. This is what I've been seeing declining. The quality is not there that I have to do it myself because the plethora is out there and the confusion is out there, and the advertorial aspect on news is distorting what I'm trying to look for so that I can make my own decision.
Go ahead, Richard.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah,
As
you're very spotty,
oh,
Richard.
okay. How about this?
Yeah,
Is this better? Okay.
yeah.
The solution has always been to pick your news outlets and your choices for news very carefully and not to rely on any one. As I said, garbage in, garbage out. And you learn after a while which news sources are believable to you, which are giving the best obtainable version of the truth, as Woodward and Bernstein like to say, and which are not. And so it's your choice as to whether you're going to watch the PBS NewsHour or Fox News Tonight. That's not the problem of quote unquote the media being all distorted. It's your choice, and it's always been that way. The founding fathers who, after yellow journalism, and you're in New York. You remember the Daily News in the 1980s at Central Park 5.
Yeah.
One was just acquitted. But I mean, it's your choice as to whether to pick up that Daily News and say, okay, or to say, okay, I'll look at the Daily News and I'll also look at these other.
You're spotty again, Richard. If you could.
I'll also look at these other media and see what they're saying.
So let me just ask, because I've worked in retail many years, and there are things like the FDA, OSHA, weights and measures that come and check out the products. If I'm selling 5 pounds of sugar and there's only 4.8 pounds in each bag, I'm going to get in trouble, presumably, unless someone is being paid off. Is it infeasible? Is it inadvisable that there could be some kind of I don't know, federal requirement for journalism to do stuff? Is that just a pipe dream, or is it just bad to begin with? David, you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
I think it's bad to begin with. If you read the First Amendment, it's not just a freedom of speech, it's a free and independent press.
Mhm.
And Richard's right, it's your responsibility to choose your media sources and compare and contrast. And that's all I've got to say about that.
Richard,
And there are some restrictions. I mean, there are libel laws, for example.
It falls in a different category.
Right. But by and large, no, the government should not be interfering in the press.
So you're in advertising, David. What if any influence have you seen seep into journalism or the media from your profession?
Well, the challenge is with advertising, there was always broadcast standards or other standards within that controlled space that you were purchasing and putting your message in. What I've been seeing is kind of weird. I mean, there's a TV show called on HGTV, the home channel, House Hunters International. And what advertisers have been doing was taking that format and making a 30 or 60-second commercial. So you don't know when the TV show ends, the commercial starts, because it's the same format, same style, where they're trying to sell you their product or service. And I find that very dangerous. As I said before, advertising to children is a very dangerous area because children don't know the difference between an ad and content. And I've got clips of advertising to children where a child is standing there in front saying, "That's the best mac and cheese," and it's branded with a cartoon character, and the father's asking, "Have you ever had that?" And the child says, "No, but I know it's the best one." And she knows it because it was advertised on TV, not because of any, there's no difference. And advertising to children is a big area of privacy. And we adults on all these devices and everything like that give away so much data about ourselves that is aggregated and interpreted, even if it's somewhat anonymous, that who owns the data is a question that needs to be brought back. So yes, things are seeping in because, and I'll tell this one story. When I was in advertising, it was said that one major retailer out of Philadelphia was asked one time, "Hey, you spend $40 million in advertising. Do you think you're wasting any of it?" And the guy said, "I'm wasting at least half of it. If I can figure out which half I'm wasting, I cut it out." Because advertising back then was one direction. It was the advertiser to the consumer. Today, with all the social media and other platforms, it's a dialogue. And it's micromanaging, it's micro advertising to the individual, almost on a person by person level. And that becomes a different kind of dialogue where you have analytics, big data, and now it's coming out as predictive analytics where I can take those data and predict which kind of customer. Target did that a few years ago, and there remain 29 different indicators as to whether the woman was pregnant or not, even before her family knew. And it got very scary, where a guy walked out, since Richard, your reaction is that a guy walked in Target and slammed the brochure down and said, "What are you trying to do, sell my 16-year-old daughter all these products?" The guy apologized profusely and then called the father 3 days later to apologize again. And the father said, "Stop, stop, stop. She's due in August." The advertiser knew by her purchases of a larger pocketbook, unscented this, certain vitamins, and so forth and so on, that the propensity that person, by those tags that you swipe to get your discounts, was of that condition. So yes, there's a lot of seepage, but it's data oriented, and therefore it becomes very dangerous. And that's what I said before, legislation is not keeping up with this technology.
I want to talk about a couple of things, and then we'll wrap up. Richard, you mentioned the Central Park incident 30 or so years ago, and famously there it was called wilding, and they were portrayed as animals. And then yet, if you see, for example, more recently, the Rittenhouse kid, the chubby white kid, he was a poor kid. Poor, he has issues, he's crying and whatnot. And you always, when you get that dichotomy, not just black and white, if it's Latino or Leonard Peltier, Native American or whatnot, you always get those portrayals where the white person is someone that needs to be on. We need to understand why. You get the media head. We need to understand why he did this. Why did some suburban white kid go into a store and shoot up 17 people or whatnot? Black kid, goes joyriding in a car, and robs a liquor store. He's an animal. Do you think that those instances of obvious bias, just like we were talking about the way the reportage of the Ukraine war is, do you think that has become lessened or become exacerbated in recent years? Because it seems for me that there's no real difference. It has become more exacerbated, in fact.
That's interesting. I think that it's become lessened. I'm hoping it's become lessened because of the outrage that has been taken place, particularly since the George Floyd case and the case of these domestic terrorists, where people realizing that, and the government even saying that domestic terrorism is more dangerous to our country at the moment than international terrorism. And you look at how a lot of the coverage of the domestic terrorists versus the international terrorists, and you will see a big difference. And people are starting to complain about it. Why are the domestic terrorists portrayed more sympathetically, and the foreign terrorists more menacingly? And that plays into, I just wrote about the Carlson situation, and the Southern Poverty Law Center made the point that this all plays into, the thesis that Tucker Carlson was putting out there, because you don't, when he praises the Great Replacement theory, which means that whites that Democrats and liberals are trying to replace white Americans with people from other countries who they feel will be more more a benefit to them politically. When these people are portrayed more sympathetically, and you talk about what he was seemed like such a nice guy next door and everything, and you don't extend the same sympathy to foreign terrorists, you create a situation in which the Tucker Carlson view of the world can thrive because people are already thinking along the lines of these poor misguided people who are blowing up our schools who just have mental problems, and that's really the reason. But that's not the same. That's not the same explanation that's given to foreign terrorists.
David, do you have a comment on what Richard just said?
I don't know if I agree 100% with what you're saying, because I look at the criminality, the terrorism that takes place on U.S. soil as horrifically as I look at any senseless killing anywhere. And whether the perpetrator has mental problems or is radicalized by social media, there have been many cases where they're radicalized by foreign influences and doing things on our soil, and they're just, or the media that's out there, which we can look to Hollywood with all their violent pictures, has been said, all the violent stuff that comes up, even Bill Maher ranted about that one time, the horrible stuff that comes out of Hollywood that is influencing our culture. So I don't know if there's one thing or it's many things. And yes, you look at gun control, you look at the accessibility of it, you look at social media, and then it's a dangerous tipping point where do we look at social media? Does authorities look at social media to prevent it? Is that too much invasion of privacy, or is there something else we could do about that? I don't think there's one solution to it, but I do agree that we have to look at these shootings, these domestic terrorisms, just as horrifically as any other terrorism. Terrorism, by definition, is to create a sense of fear in the community. Terrorism does not have to involve lots of deaths. It could be just the threat of it as well.
Well,
So
if I can follow up with David, because and I want to take the abortion issue here. I years ago, 40 years ago, when I was in high school, I remember escorting a few young women to abortion clinics and getting into some fights with some people who were throwing ketchup on them, calling them murderers, that kind of thing. If a media show were to say that the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade was a form of, say, psychological terrorism or whatnot, they would probably be lambasted. If they tried to say, well, that Judge Clarence Thomas is basically a quisling to Black America, or an Uncle Tom, if they were to say that Amy Coney Barrett is a traitor to women, they would probably be some kind of outrage. But if it's a fair thing, I mean, in other words, have a lot of times in the media have when media has gone overboard in hyperbole in one area, does that mean when there's legitimate things like criticizing Thomas or Barrett or the Gang of Six, now I guess you call it five, whatever it is, on the Supreme Court, do you think that there's any substance to that the journalists today don't want to do that because they'll be called out as being biased? David,
you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't agree. The language is what's the problem. You can disagree with everything. That's the freedom of press, the freedom of speech in this country. It's when you start using hateful words and angry words and insightful words that it crosses a line. The decision of the Supreme Court, which is a whole nother conversation altogether, is that's why we have an independent court. We can agree with it. It moves from one side to another over the arc of history. But calling out an individual in such hateful terms, I don't think is productive. I think calling out a person for making the wrong decision for whatever reason, emotionally or legalistically, that you might have, is correct. It's when it gets into that dangerous area of insightfulness that some lunatic domestic terrorist will take. Oh, that's the word of God. I've got to go follow that, and I've got to kill that person. And because we've got a lot of crazies out there. That's when it gets a lot of it gets dangerous.
Well, Joe, wasn't it Samuel Alito who just made comments on foreign journalists? Or someone he made some outrageous comments. I forget. Is there a difference between, say, attacking someone like a Joseph McCarthy, if we get a McCarthy, a similar figure, say Ted Cruz? Is there a difference between attacking Ted Cruz on the substance of his words, even if they may be harsh, and doing it against someone, say, in the Supreme Court?
Everybody's a target. Everybody's free bait. Everybody, when they get out there, they say something, they're putting themselves out there. I do believe that if you use your word, Dan, substantive, somebody makes a comment that you disagree with, you have the right to respond substantively and say, you're wrong. Your statistics are wrong on this. History has shown this has been the case. You're interpreting the facts incorrectly. Here are the facts. Here's my interpretation. As Richard said, we can interpret it different ways. But we're working off of one set of facts, and I'm not saying Ted Cruz is crazy and should be killed because he said this. I'm saying Ted Cruz is crazy because he's misinterpreting these facts about economics or the border, whatever it might be. And I did not hear what Alito said, so I can't comment on that.
Richard, what is your take on journalists being able to comment on public figures? Going back to the complicity thing, if a public figure let's just use him, Ted Cruz, says something outrageous, is there any journalistic ethos that would say that should be called out by the media?
Sure. If he makes a statement that's newsworthy, yes, it should be reported. And if there are errors in what he was saying, they should be called to the reader's attention, or viewers' attention.
And Dan, to what you said, the calling him out, and what Richard said is correct. If it's newsworthy, then it's got to be called out. If it's wanting to rebut it in a different way, then that belongs on the editorial pages.
Okay, I just want to end here before I give you a final summary. I just want to end with a little, maybe 10-20 second snippet from that video, just the summation of what the fellow said. And I'm going to hold it closer up here because I'm so high tech. But it's a video called "Why News Used to Have Less Bias" by a fellow named Ryan Chapman. I've got it up. Let me see if you can hear it. Let me know. Let's see. Okay.
For the broadcast networks, just knowing that the regulation could be enforced made them try to make more socially responsible content. Basically, the news got hit from all sides. They got hit from the activist left that saw objectivity as a form of complicity, and they got hit from the right, who deregulated the FCC, and they got hit from within their own industry, which moved news in the direction of entertainment, which made them increasingly have to make news based on audience demands and not journalistic principles. And no, those two things are not necessarily synonymous. But there was a time when journalists had freer rein to shape the news, and when objectivity was seen as the loftiest goal that a journalist could have, and bosses let journalists shape the news according to that goal. And that was in the 50s and the 60s. So I'd say that this is a myth that, for the most part, checks out. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Okay, so I don't know. Whoops.
Who actually saw, heard, felt?
My high tech there, I hit the wrong button. But Richard, do you have a comment on what that YouTuber said? His last 20 seconds there.
Yeah, I think that this whole term objectivity has been bandied about, and it's been discredited by more and more people, more and more journalists. And I think a term like fairness might be more appropriate. Objectivity has come to mean both sidesism, and objective in whose eyes is the question. As I think I mentioned earlier, this whole business about police said, for many years in journalism, what police said has been taken as sacrosanct. And if people who were on the other end of that baton stick had another version, that version was minimized. That was considered to be objective because we have the government here, and the government, of course, is they're the most objective because they have all these facts and the call of authority. Well, that's been proven to be wrong, and people are now coming to that realization, and now we do see more reporting from the other side, from what's going on from the people in the community's point of view. And when the police have been shown to have lied and made things up, and in many cases it's gone to to court. So I think that I in summary, I think we are moving in the right direction. I don't agree that things are worse than ever. Last night we had uh, the president's speech on the capture of the Al Qaeda chief, and I turned on MSNBC. I turned on several networks, but on MSNBC we had Charles Lowe, who was an African American columnist for the New York Times, uh, hosting the show. All in with Chris Hayes as the guest host, and the person he was interviewing about this was Helene Cooper, who was also African American, and she covers the Pentagon for the New York Times. That would never have happened in the '60s or the '70s because they would not have been considered objective. You know, they had this phrase, "Are you black first or a journalist first?" Just let that sink in. Nobody ever says, "Are you white first or a journalist first?" But yes, everybody brings his or her own perspective to the news, and now that's changing, and I think that's a good thing.
David?
Well, they've always challenged me, am I Jewish first or American first?
Well, there you go.
I know. Am I Italian American or American Italian? We all bring that. That's what makes diversity so great. When I taught a communications course in leadership, we talked about diversity in the workplace, and that was one of the beauties of diversity in the workplace. Is we all brought different things and how we solve problems in our own cultures or families, and that's the beauty of it. So you're right about that. But there's the issue of I call it objectivity, I call it facts, I call it without the bias of color in the adverbs one uses and saving that for the editorial page. And that I think is where things are like we talk about different news shows or shows that purport to be news, whether they be on radio or TV or in the paper. When I'm reading certain subjects, and I go back to what I said in the beginning, when I read the New York Times and I read the Wall Street Journal, more than New York Times than anything else, I find that coloring when it comes to politics and Israel more than anything else in that respect. When we talk about a fairness doctrine, life is not fair. And where do we pick up the fair? Because you had this last week, I have to have this week. There's a fairness that has to start at a certain point, and we all have to treat each other equally and well and look at content and not the other things that cloud up the issue in that respect. And going back to your quote, Daniel, of the podcast that you presented, I go back to something that yes, because the rules were in place, people behaved more. That's what happens with traffic rules or littering or anything like that. It's the broken windows concept. You have to have a set of rules and consequences. And in a free market system, I either watch the show or I don't watch the show, and the advertising go down, and therefore that person comes off the air. That's how I vote. So there are many, they may not happen fast enough, but that's how things happen in a free press environment.
So final thought then, David, and then I'll go to Richard. Final thought then on the media and its decline or not.
Well, as I've taken the position that it has declined, I pine for the old days where there was a separation between church and state, where I could read the news and not have to do the hard work of finding out myself. I know that we're in a different time technologically, but we have to adjust to that, and we have to be responsible on both sides. And by both sides, I mean the consumer being not so stupid as to look through just a lens like this, and the media bigwigs behind that trying to present a fair and balanced point of view if you're going to become the paper of record, because people are going to look this up. Once it's out there, it's out there.
Richard, give final thought from you.
Well, I agree that it's important to choose your media diet carefully. I think we're a little a little past each other when we talk about this issue of the facts, just the facts. The issue is not, for me, just the facts. The issue is which facts are you going to present to the public? There are facts and there are facts, and who's doing making the choices as to which facts will be presented is extremely important. And I think that the more diverse group of people are contributing to that process, the better off we are. And in terms of certain media outlets not presenting the news the way that we might want, we have more choices now than ever. There's got to be somebody out there who's reporting things the way you like them. And I think that it's up to us, as we said earlier, to find the news media that we believe are telling us the truth as we define it.
Well, that's an interesting choice you used there. The truth as we define it. But we'll let it go now. But Richard, I'll link to your Wikipedia page. I'll link to your university page, David. And I'll also
not the Wikipedia, the journal-isms.com.
Journalisms.com. Okay, I will.
With a hyphen between journal and isms.
Journalisms, okay. And I'll also link to the source video that I quoted from. So I thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Very welcome.